The cruelest words are often spoken by people who have never taken a moment to know the person they are judging. The sentence would stay with everyone inside that elegant New York restaurant long after the evening ended, because nobody expected a simple dinner to reveal the difference between arrogance and true character. Naomi Brooks walked through the golden entrance of the restaurant with a quiet smile, unaware that within minutes, a room full of strangers would judge her before learning her name. She was a curvy black woman in her early 30s, wearing a beautiful navy blue dress and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years learning her own worth. Naomi was not there to impress anyone. She was there to celebrate a small achievement after months of hard work. The restaurant was known as one of the most exclusive places in the city, where expensive suits, designer dresses, and powerful names filled every table. But Naomi entered with something far more valuable than status. She carried kindness, patience, and a peaceful confidence that came from overcoming difficult moments. As she approached an open table near the window, a group of wealthy guests nearby exchanged glances. Their whispers began softly, but their smiles revealed their intentions. They looked at Naomi, not as a person, but as someone they believed did not belong in their world. One woman glanced at the empty chair and laughed quietly. "Are you sure that table is for you?" she asked. Another person joined in, making comments about how the restaurant should have standards. The words were sharp, but Naomi stood still. For a moment, the entire room seemed to become smaller. The sound of conversations faded beneath the uncomfortable silence surrounding her. She looked down briefly, not because she accepted their judgment, but because she refused to give strangers the power to change who she was. The waiter hesitated, unsure how to respond. Some guests looked away, pretending not to notice. Others watched with curiosity, waiting to see what Naomi would do next. Across the restaurant, sitting at a quiet corner table, Marcus Sullivan noticed everything. Marcus was a powerful mafia boss known throughout the city, a white man in his early 40s whose presence often changed the atmosphere of any room he entered. People respected his influence, but few people truly knew him. He had spent years surrounded by individuals who measured everything by wealth, appearance, and reputation. Yet what caught his attention that night was not the cruelty of the comments. It was Naomi's response. She did not argue. She did not seek revenge. She simply stood there with a quiet dignity that seemed stronger than all the voices around her. Marcus placed his glass down slowly and watched the scene unfold. He had seen many forms of disrespect in his life, but something about this moment felt different. A person who had every reason to be angry was choosing to remain composed. Naomi finally turned slightly toward the exit, preparing to leave rather than create a scene. But before she could take another step, Marcus looked toward the table where the laughter continued. And for the first time that evening, the powerful man everyone feared decided he could not remain silent. The room had no idea that the person sitting quietly in the corner had just heard every word. And they were about to learn that respect was not something reserved for the powerful. It was something every person deserved. The silence inside the restaurant became heavier as Marcus Sullivan slowly stood from his table. Nobody expected the quiet man in the corner to become the center of attention. The guests who had been laughing moments earlier suddenly noticed the change in the atmosphere. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His calm presence alone was enough to make conversations fade. Naomi Brooks looked back, surprised to see someone stepping forward when everyone else had chosen to remain silent. Marcus walked toward the manager, his expression serious but controlled. "I have a question," he said. "Who decided that respect should depend on someone's appearance?" The manager immediately looked uncomfortable. He knew Marcus's reputation, but what surprised him more was the reason behind Marcus's concern. This was not about money, status, or influence. It was about a person being treated unfairly. The guests who had made the comments avoided eye contact. They expected anger, but Marcus gave them something they did not expect: accountability. A restaurant's reputation is not built by who can afford the most expensive meal, Marcus said quietly. It is built by how people are treated when they walk through the door. Naomi watched carefully. She had expected someone with Marcus's appearance and confidence to act out of pride, but instead, he spoke with restraint. There was no desire to embarrass anyone. There was only a clear message that dignity mattered. The manager apologized to Naomi and offered her another table. But Naomi hesitated. She did not want attention. She did not want the entire room looking at her because someone finally decided to defend her. She simply wanted to enjoy her evening like everyone else. Marcus noticed her hesitation. "You do not have to leave," he said gently. "You were invited here just like everyone else." Those words meant more than he realized. Naomi had heard many opinions about herself throughout her life. Some people saw her before they knew her. Some people judged her before hearing her story. But very few people recognized the person behind the appearance. Marcus had done that in a single moment. Naomi returned to the table near the window, not because Marcus told her to, but because she realized she had every right to be there. The room slowly returned to normal, but the feeling had changed. The same people who had laughed earlier now sat quietly, aware that their words had revealed more about themselves than they had revealed about Naomi. Marcus returned to his seat, but his attention remained on the woman across the room. He was curious, not because she needed saving, but because she had shown a level of strength he rarely saw. Later that evening, when Naomi finished her dinner and prepared to leave, she passed by Marcus's table. She stopped for a moment and offered a small smile. "Thank you," she said. Marcus nodded. "You should not have needed anyone to remind people of your worth." Naomi looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe, but I appreciate that someone remembered." Then, she walked away into the city lights, leaving Marcus with a feeling he could not easily explain. For years, people had respected him because of his power. But that night, he respected someone else because of her courage. And that difference stayed with him long after the restaurant doors closed. The morning after the restaurant incident, Marcus Sullivan found himself thinking about a stranger he had only spoken to for a few minutes. That was unusual for a man who spent his life surrounded by important conversations, complicated decisions, and people constantly trying to gain his attention. Yet Naomi Brooks was different. She had not asked for his help, his influence, or anything that came with his name. She had simply stood there with quiet confidence while others tried to make her feel small. And somehow, that moment stayed with him. Marcus returned to the same restaurant several days later for a business meeting. The place looked exactly the same, but something felt different. The same elegant tables, the same soft lighting, the same carefully dressed guests. But Marcus noticed the small details now. He noticed who was welcomed warmly and who was overlooked. He noticed how quickly people formed opinions based on appearances. For years, he had been surrounded by people who judged others by wealth and status. He had simply accepted it as the way the world worked. But after meeting Naomi, he started questioning things he had never questioned before. Later that afternoon, Marcus unexpectedly saw Naomi again. She was leaving a local community center carrying several boxes of supplies. Unlike the woman he had seen at the restaurant, dressed for a special evening, she looked completely ordinary. She wore comfortable clothes, her hair was naturally styled, and she was helping volunteers prepare donations for families in need. Marcus watched from a distance as she greeted everyone with the same kindness she had shown him. She thanked volunteers. She encouraged people who looked tired. She smiled at children who passed by. Nobody there cared about her appearance. They cared about her heart. Marcus approached slowly, and Naomi recognized him immediately. "I did not expect to see you here," she said with a surprised smile. Marcus looked at the boxes around her. "I could say the same thing." Naomi laughed softly. "I help here when I have time. Everyone deserves support sometimes." Marcus looked at her carefully. "You were treated unfairly that night, and yet you still spend your time helping other people." Naomi paused for a moment before answering. "Someone being unkind to me does not give me a reason to become unkind myself." Those words stayed with Marcus. He had heard powerful people speak for hours about leadership, loyalty, and strength. But Naomi explained those ideas in one simple sentence. Her strength was not loud. It did not demand attention. It simply existed. As they walked through the community center, Marcus learned more about her life. Naomi had spent years working hard, supporting her family, and building a career while facing unfair assumptions about her appearance. She never denied that those moments hurt, but she refused to let them define her. Marcus realized something important. The woman others had underestimated possessed a kind of confidence that money could never purchase. Before leaving, Marcus thanked her for the conversation. Naomi smiled and told him she hoped he would visit the community center again. As Marcus walked back toward his car, he looked over his shoulder and saw Naomi returning to help others. For the first time in many years, the powerful mafia boss felt inspired by someone who had no interest in power at all. and that realization made him wonder what else he had been missing. Marcus Sullivan had spent years believing that power was the only language people truly respected. His name carried weight across the city, and his presence could change the mood of any room before he even spoke. But after meeting Naomi Brooks, he started noticing something he had ignored for most of his life. The strongest people were not always the ones with the most influence. Sometimes, strength appeared quietly, through patience, kindness, and the ability to remain graceful when the world offered every reason to become bitter. Several days after seeing Naomi at the community center, Marcus found himself returning there again. He told himself it was simply curiosity, but deep down, he knew there was something about her perspective that continued to challenge him. The community center was nothing like the places where Marcus usually spent his time. There were no luxury cars outside, no expensive suits, and no people trying to impress each other. Instead, there were volunteers sharing meals, families supporting one another, and neighbors creating something meaningful together. Naomi was in the middle of it all. She moved from one person to another with the same warmth she showed everyone. When Marcus approached, she smiled. "You came back," she said. Marcus nodded. "I wanted to understand why this place matters so much to you." Naomi looked around the room before answering. "Because everyone deserves a place where they feel seen." Those words stayed with Marcus. He had spent years surrounded by people who noticed what others owned, what they achieved, or who they knew. Naomi noticed something different. She noticed people. That afternoon, Marcus helped carry supplies and organize donations. It was a simple task, something he had never imagined doing before. Yet he found himself enjoying the quiet satisfaction of helping without expecting anything in return. Naomi noticed his effort, but did not treat him differently because of it. She did not praise him excessively or act impressed by his reputation. She simply thanked him like she would thank anyone else. That honesty affected him more than admiration ever could. Later, as they sat outside the community center during a peaceful evening, Marcus asked Naomi a question he had been thinking about. "How do you stay kind after people have judged you so unfairly?" Naomi looked toward the street lights glowing across the neighborhood. "Because if I let other people's opinions change who I am, then they control something that belongs only to me." Marcus remained silent. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but that answer reached him in a way he did not expect. He realized Naomi was not strong because she had never been hurt. She was strong because she refused to let those moments define her. Before they left, Marcus offered to support the community center. Naomi accepted his offer, but only after making one thing clear. Help because you believe in it, not because you want people to notice. Marcus smiled slightly. It was another lesson from someone who had never tried to teach him anything. As he walked away that evening, he understood that Naomi was changing his view of the world without ever asking him to change. And for a man who had spent his entire life believing he had all the answers, that was the most unexpected discovery of all. Marcus Sullivan had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Some wanted his influence, some wanted his approval, and others simply wanted to stand close to his reputation. But Naomi Brooks was different. She never looked at him as a powerful mafia boss. She looked at him as a person. That difference continued to stay in his mind long after their conversations ended. As the weeks passed, Marcus began spending more time at the community center and less time inside the world that had always surrounded him. His advisors noticed the change. The man who once measured every decision by profit and advantage was now asking questions about neighborhood programs, local families, and ways to support people without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, Marcus visited Naomi at the small bakery where she worked part-time before helping at the community center. He found her carefully preparing orders while greeting every customer with the same warmth she showed everyone else. A customer accidentally dropped a box near the entrance, and before anyone else could react, Naomi was already helping clean everything up with a smile. Marcus watched quietly. It was another reminder that kindness was not something she performed when people were watching. It was simply who she was. Later, as they walked through the neighborhood, Marcus noticed how many people greeted Naomi by name. Children waved at her. Elderly neighbors smiled when they saw her. Local shop owners thanked her for helping during difficult times. She had built connections everywhere without ever trying to gain power. "How do you know so many people?" Marcus asked. Naomi smiled. "I listen to them. People remember when someone makes them feel valued." Marcus looked around the street and realized that Naomi had created something he had spent years trying to create through influence. Trust. That evening, Marcus received news that a large development company was planning to purchase several properties in the neighborhood, including the community center where Naomi volunteered. His first instinct was to solve the problem immediately. He had the resources and connections to make things happen quickly. But then he remembered Naomi's words. Help because you believe in it, not because you want people to notice. For the first time, Marcus stopped and considered a different approach. He did not want to be the powerful man who arrived and took control. He wanted to be someone who stood beside the people affected. The next day, Marcus invited neighborhood leaders, business owners, and residents to discuss the situation together. Naomi was surprised when she saw him arrive, not with a team of assistants, but alone. You are doing this differently, she said. Marcus looked at the people gathering around them. I am trying to learn. Those 3 words meant more than any grand promise. Naomi realized that the man standing before her was no longer the same person she had met at the restaurant. He was still powerful. He was still respected. But now, he was beginning to understand that true strength was not about making people listen. It was about learning when to listen yourself. And as the community prepared to protect the place they loved, Marcus discovered that the greatest change was not happening around him. It was happening within him. The community meeting brought together people from every corner of the neighborhood. Small business owners, teachers, volunteers, parents, and longtime residents filled the room with quiet determination. They were not there to argue. They were there to protect a place that had become part of their lives. Marcus Sullivan stood near the back of the room instead of taking the front. Only a few weeks earlier, he would have naturally assumed control of every conversation. Now he understood that this story did not belong to him. It belonged to the people who had built their lives around this community. Naomi Brooks stood before the gathering with calm confidence. She spoke about the families who depended on the community center, the children who found encouragement there after school, and the older neighbors who finally found companionship after years of loneliness. She never exaggerated. She simply told the truth. The room listened in complete silence because every word came from experience instead of emotion alone. Marcus watched the audience carefully. Faces that had arrived carrying uncertainty slowly changed into expressions of hope. He realized that leadership did not always require the loudest voice. Sometimes it only required someone brave enough to speak honestly. When the representatives from the development company presented their plans, they spoke about profits, expansion, and future investments. Their proposals sounded impressive, but something was missing. They never mentioned the people whose lives would be affected. Naomi quietly stood once more and thanked them for explaining their vision. Then she invited several local residents to share their own stories. An elderly veteran explained how the community center had become his second home after losing his wife. A single mother described how volunteers helped her children every afternoon while she worked. A high school student spoke about finding confidence through programs that encouraged young people to dream beyond their circumstances. Marcus noticed something remarkable. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Truth was doing what power alone never could. By the end of the meeting, even members of the development team appeared thoughtful. They requested additional time to reconsider their proposal and explore alternatives that could preserve the neighborhood while still achieving their goals. As people slowly left the building, many thanked Naomi for speaking on behalf of the community. Others quietly thanked Marcus for creating the opportunity without trying to control the outcome. Naomi walked beside Marcus into the cool evening air. Streetlights reflected softly across the sidewalk as families returned home with hopeful expressions. You trusted everyone to tell their own story, Naomi said. Marcus smiled gently. I finally understood that my voice did not need to be the loudest one in the room. Naomi looked at him with quiet admiration. That might be the strongest thing you have done. Marcus remained silent for a moment before answering. I thought respect came from being feared. You showed me that real respect is earned when people feel heard. Naomi smiled warmly because she knew those words were sincere. As they stood together outside the community center, surrounded by ordinary people sharing ordinary conversations, Marcus realized he no longer measured success by influence alone. He measured it by the number of lives that could leave a room feeling hopeful instead of defeated. And for the first time in many years, that kind of victory meant more to him than anything his power had ever accomplished. The days following the community meeting felt different for everyone in the neighborhood, but no one noticed the change more than Marcus Sullivan. For years, he had believed that problems were solved by finding the fastest solution, making the strongest decision, and ensuring everyone followed his direction. That mindset had built his reputation as a powerful mafia boss, but it had also created a distance between him and the people around him. Now, standing beside Naomi Brooks and watching the community come together, Marcus was learning a completely different definition of strength. The community center remained open, and the neighborhood continued to support one another. People who once felt powerless now felt connected. Marcus quietly helped where he could, but he no longer looked for recognition. He arrived early to meetings, listened to concerns, and asked questions before offering answers. Those small actions surprised the people who knew him best. One afternoon, Marcus visited the community center and found Naomi organizing a small celebration for the volunteers. Colorful decorations filled the room. Tables were covered with homemade food, and neighbors gathered to thank everyone who had worked together. Marcus stood near the entrance for a moment, watching the happiness around him. Naomi noticed him and smiled. "You are early," she said. Marcus looked around the room. "I wanted to help before everyone arrived." Naomi raised an eyebrow playfully. "That sounds very different from the man I met at the restaurant." Marcus smiled because he knew she was right. The man who had once believed every situation required control was slowly becoming someone who understood cooperation. During the celebration, several people approached Marcus to thank him. Each time, he redirected the attention toward Naomi and the volunteers. He explained that the community had saved itself through courage and unity. Naomi watched quietly, realizing how much he had changed. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Marcus and Naomi sat outside the community center. The city lights reflected across the street, and the neighborhood was peaceful. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Naomi asked. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I miss how certain I felt. Back then, I believed having all the answers made me strong." He paused and looked toward the building behind them. "Now I think strength comes from knowing when you need to learn from someone else." Naomi smiled softly. She understood that Marcus was not pretending to be different. He had genuinely changed because he had allowed himself to see the world through another person's perspective. However, Marcus knew his journey was not finished. There were still people in his world who did not understand his choices. Some questioned why he spent time helping a neighborhood that had nothing to offer him financially. Others believed kindness was a weakness that could be taken advantage of. But Marcus no longer saw kindness that way. He had discovered that compassion required more courage than control. Before leaving, Naomi handed Marcus a small flower arrangement created from leftover flowers at the community center. "For what?" he asked. She smiled. "A reminder." Marcus looked at the flowers carefully. "Of what?" Naomi answered. "That something beautiful can grow when people choose to take care of it." Marcus carried the flowers home that night, but he carried something more valuable as well. He carried a new understanding of himself. The world still saw him as a powerful mafia boss, but Naomi had shown him the person he could become when he stopped trying to prove his strength and started using it to make a difference. The neighborhood had changed in ways nobody expected, but the greatest transformation was not the renovated buildings, the growing community programs, or the new opportunities appearing every week. The greatest change was the person Marcus Sullivan had become. The city still knew him as a powerful mafia boss, a man whose name carried influence and respect. But the people who worked alongside him now saw something different. They saw a man who listened before speaking, a man who helped without asking for recognition, and a man who had learned that true leadership was not about standing above others. It was about standing with them. Naomi Brooks noticed the difference more than anyone. She remembered the first night they met, when she had walked into that restaurant expecting nothing more than a quiet dinner. She remembered the judgment, the whispers, and the feeling of being treated as though she did not belong. But she also remembered Marcus standing up when everyone else chose silence. Over time, she discovered that his action was not about showing power. It was about recognizing someone's humanity when others refused to. One afternoon, Marcus visited the community center and found Naomi preparing a special event for local families. Children were creating handmade cards, volunteers were arranging tables, and neighbors were sharing stories over coffee. Marcus watched from the doorway with a small smile. Naomi walked over and noticed his expression. "You look surprised," she said. Marcus nodded. I am. I spent years believing people came together because someone powerful made it happen. I was wrong. Naomi looked around the room. People come together because they care. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them. Marcus thought about those words. They reminded him of how different his life had become. He once believed respect came from making sure others recognized his strength. Now he understood that respect came from making sure others recognized their own strength. Later that evening, Marcus and Naomi walked through the neighborhood as the sun disappeared behind the buildings. Small businesses were closing for the day, families were heading home, and the streets carried a peaceful energy. Do you ever think about how different things would have been if we never met? Naomi asked. Marcus smiled slightly. More often than I expected. What do you think would have happened? She asked. Marcus looked at the lights of the community around them. I probably would have continued believing I was doing everything right. Naomi smiled because she understood what he meant. Sometimes people did not change because someone forced them to. Sometimes they changed because someone showed them a different way to see the world. Before they reached the flower shop where Naomi volunteered on weekends, Marcus stopped and looked at the neighborhood one more time. I used to think power meant never needing anyone, he said. Now I think it means having enough strength to care about something beyond yourself. Naomi looked at him with quiet respect. The man standing beside her was still Marcus Sullivan. He was still powerful. He was still influential. But he was no longer defined only by those things. As they continued walking, neither of them noticed the small moments happening around them. A child holding a flower from the community garden. A neighbor helping another carry groceries. A shop owner smiling as customers entered. Those simple moments were the result of many people choosing kindness over indifference. And Marcus finally understood that the most meaningful things in life were not built through control. They were built through trust, patience, and the courage to treat others with dignity. Months after the night that changed everything, the restaurant where Naomi Brooks had once been judged became a place that told a completely different story. The same elegant tables remained, the same golden lights reflected across the polished floor, and the same city moved outside the windows. But the atmosphere had changed. People no longer noticed who looked like they belonged and who did not. They noticed kindness, character, and the way people treated each other. Naomi returned to the restaurant one evening for a community celebration honoring local volunteers. She walked through the entrance with the same quiet confidence she had carried on the night when strangers tried to make her feel invisible. But this time, the room welcomed her with smiles. The staff greeted her warmly. Guests recognized her work in the community. The woman who had once been judged by people who knew nothing about her was now respected by people who understood everything about her heart. Marcus Sullivan arrived shortly after. He was still the powerful mafia boss the city recognized, but his presence felt different. He no longer entered rooms expecting attention. He entered them with humility. Naomi smiled when she saw him. You came, she said. Marcus nodded. I would not miss it. As they stood together near the window, they watched volunteers, families, and neighbors sharing stories. Marcus looked around the room and remembered the person he used to be. A man who believed control created security. A man who thought respect came from reputation. A man who rarely stopped to understand the people around him. Naomi had never tried to change him. She had never demanded that he become someone else. She had simply shown him a different way to see the world. Do you remember that night? Naomi asked softly. Marcus smiled. I remember every detail. Naomi looked around the restaurant. Funny how one moment can change so much. Marcus nodded. It was not the moment that changed everything. It was what I learned from it. Those words represented the journey they had taken. Naomi had learned that even in moments of humiliation, there could be unexpected kindness. Marcus had learned that true power was not measured by how many people feared him, but by how many people felt valued because of him. As the evening continued, Marcus noticed a young woman entering the restaurant nervously, looking around as if she was unsure whether she belonged. For a brief moment, he remembered Naomi standing in that same position months earlier. He walked over and welcomed her with the same respect he had learned to give everyone. Naomi watched from a distance and smiled. She understood that change was not always announced with dramatic moments. Sometimes it appeared in small actions, quiet decisions, and simple acts of humanity. The city would always remember Marcus Sullivan as a powerful man. But those who truly knew him remembered something greater. They remembered a man who discovered that dignity was never something granted by wealth, appearance, or status. It was something every person carried from the beginning. And on that evening, surrounded by people who had learned to see beyond appearances, everyone remembered that respect is earned through humility.